Get this human garbage away from me before I call the police myself. The words cut through the cold morning air outside Manhattan Criminal Court like a blade. Victoria Chen, senior partner at Chen Associates, stood in her 3,000 Armani suit, her Hermes briefcase clutched tight, staring down at a man sitting on the courthouse steps. Her diamond earrings caught the early light as she raised her manicured hand to cover her nose dramatically. God, you even smell like the gutter you crawled out of. The man-weathered face, salt and pepper beard, wearing a tattered green army jacket and boots held together with duct tape, didn't move. He just looked up at her with eyes that held something she was too arrogant to notice. Quiet recognition. What Victoria Chen didn't know in that moment, as she called security and demanded this vagrant be removed from her courthouse, was that in exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes, she would be standing before that very same man begging for mercy. Have you ever destroyed someone so completely, so publicly, only to discover they held your entire future in their hands? Inside the courthouse, the morning buzzing with the usual chaos of the criminal justice system. Lawyers in expensive suits rushed between courtrooms, their Italian leather shoes clicking against marble floors that had witnessed a century of justice and injustice. Victoria Chen was a legend in these halls, 32 years old. Harvard Law, undefeated in 12 high-profile criminal defense cases. She represented the kind of clients who could afford $850 per hour. CEOs accused of fraud, politicians caught in scandals, wealthy heirs facing DUI charges. Her reputation was built on ruthless cross-examination and an ability to make witnesses crumble under pressure. The legal community called her the Ice Queen. Her opponents called her worse things behind closed doors. She commanded respect through fear, walking into courtrooms like she owned them, treating court officers like servants and public defenders like they were beneath her notice. This morning was supposed to be her coronation, the Morrison case, where tech billionaire Marcus Morrison faced embezzlement charges totaling $47 million. If Victoria won, she'd make partner with full equity. Her name on the door, her future secured. The firm had already ordered the new letterhead. But first, she'd had to deal with that disgusting homeless man polluting the courthouse steps. Michael Harrison had been sitting on those steps since 5:47 a.m., watching the sunrise paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of amber and gold. At 58 years old, he'd seen a lot of sunrises from his childhood home in Brooklyn, from his college dorm at Columbia, from the judge's chambers where he presided for the past 23 years. This morning was different, though. This morning was the culmination of something he'd been planning for 6 months. You see, Michael Harrison wasn't homeless. Well, technically he was staying in a shelter, but that was by choice. For half a year, he'd been conducting an experiment, living among the invisible people of New York City, the ones society pretended not to see. It started after a case that haunted him, a homeless veteran who'd been beaten to death by 3 teenagers who thought it would be funny. The defense attorneys, including one particularly vicious young lawyer named Victoria Chen, had argued the boys were just pulling a prank, and couldn't have known the man was so fragile. The jury bought it. Reduced charges, minimal sentences. The veteran, James Rodriguez, 62, died for entertainment. Michael had gone home that night to his Upper West Side brownstone, poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, and made a decision. He wanted to really understand what it meant to be invisible. So he'd taken a leave of absence, told his wife Eleanor it was for research, and disappeared into the streets. For 6 months he slept in shelters, ate at soup kitchens, sat on subway platforms with a cup, and watched how people treated him. Or rather, didn't treat him. The transformation was shocking. Michael Harrison, the judge, commanded instant respect. Michael Harrison, the homeless man, was less than furniture. People stepped over him, spat near him. One teenager had thrown a half-empty Starbucks cup at his head. But the worst, the absolute worst, were the lawyers. He'd watched dozens of them walk past him on courthouse steps across the city. These champions of justice who'd advocate passionately for their clients, then treat homeless people like they were infectious diseases. He documented it all. Dates, times, names, specific incidents. And this morning, Victoria Chen had just earned herself a special place in his documentation. Now, sitting on those steps in his disguise, Michael watched her through the courthouse doors as she preened in front of security, making sure everyone knew a dangerous vagrant had harassed her. She was loud about it, performing her outrage for the gathering crowd of lawyers and court officers. "I'm serious, he could have a weapon. These people are unpredictable. Someone needs to do a better job screening who gets near this building." Security guard Marcus Williams, a 19-year veteran who'd seen Michael in that courthouse thousands of times, approached cautiously. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Michael stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He looked Marcus directly in the eye and gave the slightest nod. Marcus's eyes widened recognition. Shock, confusion, but Michael shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Not yet." "Yes, officer," Michael said, his voice gravelly, playing the part. "Sorry for the trouble." He shuffled away, disappearing around the corner, leaving Victoria to celebrate her victory over the dangerous homeless man. Inside, she checked her watch. 8:34 a.m. The Morrison case was set for 10:00 a.m. She had time to review her notes one final time. Maybe grab an overpriced latte from the courthouse cafe. Everything was falling into place. What she didn't know was that Judge Raymond Preston, originally assigned to the Morrison case, had called in sick that morning with acute appendicitis. "Emergency surgery," the clerk said. "They'd need a substitute judge. Someone already in the building, familiar with high-profile cases, capable of handling the pressure." The court administrator was making calls. At 9:15 a.m., Victoria sat in the attorney lounge, reviewing her opening statement. Her associate, James Park, a nervous 26-year-old in his first year at the firm, sat across from her, occasionally glancing up from his laptop. "Victoria," James said hesitantly, "did you see who the substitute judge is?" She didn't look up from her notes. "Does it matter? I've worked with everyone in this courthouse. They all know my reputation. It's Judge Harrison." She froze. Her pen stopped moving across the legal pad. Judge Michael Harrison had a reputation that preceded him by miles. Brilliant legal mind. Uncompromising on procedure. Impossible to manipulate or charm. He was known for two things: absolutely no tolerance for prosecutorial misconduct, and absolutely no tolerance for attorney misconduct of any kind. He'd held lawyers in contempt for far less than what most judges overlooked. He'd once fined a prosecutor $5,000 for showing up 7 minutes late. He'd banned an attorney from his courtroom for a month after catching him texting during testimony. But he was fair, scrupulously fair, if you played by the rules. Victoria had appeared before him 3 times. She'd won twice, lost once. The loss still burned. "Well," she said, recovering her composure, "at least it's someone competent. Preston was too soft anyway. Harrison will keep the prosecution in line." James nodded, though something in his expression suggested doubt. At 9:47 a.m., Victoria rode the elevator to the 5th floor, her confidence rebuilt. She'd handled Harrison before. She knew his tells, his preferences. She'd be fine. The courtroom was already filling journalists. Morrison's family, representatives from the tech company, curious attorneys who wanted to watch the Ice Queen at work. At 9:58 a.m., the bailiff called out, "All rise. The Honorable Judge Michael Harrison presiding." The side door opened, and Victoria Chen's entire world tilted on its axis. The man who walked through that door wearing formal black robes, American flag pin on his lapel, looked directly at Victoria with those same quiet eyes she'd seen that morning. The same salt and pepper beard, now neatly trimmed. The same weathered face, now washed and dignified. The same man she'd called human garbage less than 90 minutes ago. Her briefcase hit the floor. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. Her face drained of color so quickly that James grabbed her elbow, thinking she might faint. Judge Harrison settled into his chair behind the bench with the calm of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. He adjusted his reading glasses, opened the case file, and finally looked up at the assembled attorneys. His eyes landed on Victoria and stayed there for 3 long seconds. "Counsel," he said, his voice clear and authoritative, nothing like the gravelly performance from the courthouse steps. "Please state your appearances for the record." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Torres, stood first. "Rebecca Torres for the people, Your Honor." All eyes turned to Victoria. She stood, her legs trembling, her voice caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. "V. Victoria Chen for the defendant, Marcus Morrison, Your Honor." "Ms. Chen," Judge Harrison said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Is there something wrong? You look unwell." The courtroom was silent except for the ambient hum of the ventilation system. Every person present could feel the tension, though most didn't understand why. "No, Your Honor," Victoria managed. "I'm fine." "Good," he replied. "Because we have serious matters to address today, and I need counsel who can focus on the case at hand rather than on distractions." He paused, then added, "Are there any preliminary motions before we proceed with jury selection?" Victoria's mind raced. Should she recuse herself, request a continuance, pretend this morning never happened? Her entire career flashed before her eyes: 12 years of law school debt, grueling associate years, building her reputation case by case. All of it could evaporate if Judge Harrison decided to mention what happened. But he said nothing. He simply waited, his expression unreadable. "No preliminary motions, Your Honor," Victoria heard herself say. The morning proceeded with excruciating tension. During jury selection, Victoria went through the motions, asking her standard questions, but her hands shook every time she had to address the bench. Judge Harrison was scrupulously professional, ruling on objections without any hint of bias, maintaining perfect judicial demeanor. But Victoria could feel it, the weight of his knowledge, the sword hanging over her head. During the lunch recess, she practically ran to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall. Her hands gripped the cold metal walls as she tried to breathe, tried to think. What was he doing? Was this some kind of test? Was he waiting for her to confess? To apologize? Or was he planning to destroy her in front of everyone? When she returned to the courtroom at 2:00 p.m., Judge Harrison called counsel to sidebar. Victoria approached on legs that felt like water. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed in her panic. His robe was immaculate, his bearing dignified, but there on his wrist was a worn green watch band, the same one he'd been wearing that morning under the army jacket. "Miss Chen," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only the attorneys and court reporter could hear. "I want to address something before we continue." This was it, her career ending in a sidebar conference. She braced herself. "This case involves complex financial evidence," he continued. "I want to make sure both counsel are prepared to present technical testimony in a way the jury can understand. Ms. Torres, your expert witness list is extensive. Be prepared to justify each one. Ms. Chen, your cross-examination strategy will need to be airtight. I won't tolerate grandstanding or theatrics in my courtroom. Both of you, this is about justice, not performance. Am I clear? They both nodded. Good. Let's proceed. Victoria returned to her table, more confused than before. He was treating her with the same stern professionalism he showed every attorney. No special treatment, no retaliation, no acknowledgement of the morning's incident. The trial continued for 3 days. Victoria's initial panic gradually gave way to grudging amazement. Judge Harrison was conducting one of the most meticulously fair trials she'd ever witnessed. When the prosecution overstepped, he shut it down. When Victoria's objections had merit, he sustained them. He asked clarifying questions that helped the jury understand complex financial structures. He was patient with confused witnesses, firm with evasive ones. He was, in short, exactly what a judge should be. On the 4th day, during a break, Victoria finally worked up the courage to approach him in chambers. His law clerk, a bright-eyed recent graduate from NYU, looked up from her desk. Judge Harrison isn't seeing counsel during breaks, Miss Chen. Please, Victoria said. It's not about the case. It's personal. The clerk disappeared into the inner office. A moment later, she returned. 5 minutes. Victoria entered the chamber's walls lined with legal volumes, a desk covered with case files, a photo of Judge Harrison with what must be his wife and 2 adult children. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He didn't turn when she entered. Your Honor, she began, her voice small in a way it never was in courtroom combat. I owe you an apology. What I said. On the courthouse steps, Ms. Chen, he interrupted, still not turning. Are you apologizing because you're sorry? Or because you're afraid I'll retaliate? The question hung in the air like smoke. Both, she admitted. At least you're honest. He finally turned to face her. Do you know why I didn't mention the incident in court? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because this case isn't about you and me. It's about justice for your client and for the people of New York. Your client deserves the best defense possible, regardless of your personal failings. That's how the system is supposed to work. He walked to his desk, picked up a file, and held it up. This is my documentation from 6 months of living on the streets. 47 attorneys walked past me with disgust or fear. 33 actively insulted me. 12 threatened to call security. You weren't the first, Miss Chen. You were just the loudest. Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes, not sadness but shame, deep and acidic. Why? She whispered. Because I wanted to understand, he said simply. I wanted to know what it felt like to be invisible, to be treated as less than human by the very people who claim to serve justice. And I learned something important. The people who advocate most passionately for the rights of their clients often treat the most vulnerable among us like they're worthless. He sat down, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. I'm not going to report you to the Bar Association, Ms. Chen. I'm not going to hold you in contempt. I'm not even going to tell anyone what happened. But I want you to understand something. Every person you see, every homeless person, every janitor, every security guard, every clerk is someone. They have stories, families, histories. They deserve your respect. Not because of who they might secretly be, but because they're human. Victoria stood there, stripped of all her armor, all her confidence, all her carefully constructed defenses. "What do you want me to do?" "Win your case," he said. "If your client is innocent, or if the prosecution failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you do your job. That's the system. But maybe, when this is over, take a walk through your city and actually see the people you've been stepping over." She nodded, unable to speak. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Ms. Chen, for what it's worth, you're a talented attorney. I've seen you work. You have a gift for advocacy. Don't waste it on cruelty." The trial concluded 2 days later. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Victoria delivered a closing argument that was technically brilliant, but somehow different, less theatrical, more genuine. She didn't grandstand. She just told her client's story with clarity and passion. The verdict came back. Not guilty on the major charges, guilty on 2 minor counts. It was, objectively, a victory. Marcus Morrison walked out facing 18 months instead of 25 years. Victoria's reputation was intact. The firm made her partner. Her name went on the door, but something had changed in her. 3 weeks later, Victoria Chen did something she'd never done before. She volunteered at a legal clinic providing free representation to homeless individuals facing minor charges. She sat across from a woman named Jennifer, 54, who'd been arrested for sleeping in a subway car. "Tell me what happened," Victoria said. And for the first time in her career, she actually listened with the intent to understand rather than to prepare her next argument. Judge Michael Harrison returned to his regular rotation after his research project became public. The legal community was shocked, fascinated, appalled. Some called it brilliant. Others called it a publicity stunt. He didn't care about either opinion. He'd learned what he needed to learn. He submitted his 287-page report to the State Bar Association. The Invisible Clients: How Officers of the Court Treat Society's Most Vulnerable. It included names, dates, specific incidents. 47 attorneys received letters requesting they attend mandatory ethics training. The report sparked reforms across the New York court system: mandatory annual training on implicit bias, new protocols for attorney conduct, and funding for legal services for homeless individuals. But the most significant change was quieter, more personal. Victoria Chen, who once called a man human garbage on courthouse steps, now kept a photo on her desk. It was from a legal clinic, surrounded by 6 clients she'd helped, all of them smiling. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Everyone deserves to be seen." Sometimes the universe has a way of teaching us the lessons we need exactly when we need them. Sometimes the person we destroy with our words is precisely the one who can show us who we're capable of becoming. And sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. If you've ever judged someone without knowing their story, if you've ever looked past someone because you thought they didn't matter, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that everyone deserves dignity. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed how you saw the world? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.